This is VOA News. Reporting by remote, I'm Joe Ramsey. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is hailing protesters in an occupied city for their courage in confronting Russian troops who fired shots to disperse the demonstration. Russian troops on Monday used stun grenades and fired in the air to break up demonstrators in the southern city of Kherson. Speaking in a video address, Zelensky has said that the war has turned ordinary Ukrainians into heroes. Meanwhile, the White House says President Joe Biden and European leaders discussed their concerns about Russia's tactics in Ukraine, including attacks on civilians. President Joe Biden is also urging U.S. companies to make sure their digital doors are locked tight because of what he calls evolving intelligence that Russia is considering launching cyber attacks against critical infrastructure targets as the war in Ukraine continues. Biden's top cybersecurity aide, Ann Neuberger, expressed frustration at a White House press briefing Monday that some critical infrastructure entities have ignored alerts from federal agencies to fix known problems in software that could be exploited by Russian hackers. The federal government has been providing warnings to U.S. companies of threats posed by Russian hackers since long before the invasion of Ukraine last month. Russia's invasion, now in its fourth week, has largely stalled. It has failed to seize any major cities, much less capture Kiev or topple Zelensky. But Russia has caused massive destruction to residential areas, particularly in the city of Mariupol, which was once home to 400,000 people. Find more at voanews.com. This is VOA News. Ukrainian and Russian citizens are descending on the Mexican border city of Tijuana to request political asylum in the United States. With Vicente Calderon in Tijuana, VOA's Mike O'Sullivan reports that many Ukrainians are able to cross the border while Russian citizens are having a harder time.
Dozens of Russians and Ukrainians camped out in recent days on the Mexican side of the border, both groups hoping to be admitted to the United States to claim asylum status. The Ukrainians are mostly gaining entry to file their claim, following a U.S. Customs and Border Protection memo dated March 11th, urging they be considered for exemptions to the public health provision invoked by former President Donald Trump that makes it difficult for people to enter the United States to claim asylum. Trump cited the threat of COVID-19. The measure is still in force under President Joe Biden. There was no mention of Russians in the memo, however, although both groups at the border say they oppose Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. A Russian restaurant manager named Mark, who asks that his last name not be used, says he left his job and country over the war.
They're telling that they're trying to make Ukrainian people live better. I don't believe it. Bombing and destroying the buildings, I don't believe it. I don't believe no word that is said by the television.
Escaping a war with no end in sight, or a country that is increasingly intolerant of dissent, with people from both sides hoping for asylum. With Vicente Calderon in Tijuana, Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News.
A young Ukrainian girl who went viral for singing a hit song from the movie Frozen performed in a much different venue. The AP's Ed Donahue reports.
7-year-old Amelia Anasovich started singing in a bomb shelter in Kyiv. The cell phone video drew worldwide attention. Amelia is now out of Ukraine and is in Poland. She performed her country's anthem live on stage at a charity concert. She wore a traditional Ukrainian embroidered dress and sang in the same clear voice that could be heard in that cell phone video. Amelia is with her grandmother and her brother in Poland, but her parents remain in Kyiv. I'm Ed Donahue.
Recapping our top story, Ukraine's president is hailing protesters in the occupied city of Kherson and their courage in confronting Russian troops who fired shots at them. Reporting by remote, I'm Joe Ramsey. This is VOA News. Reporting by remote, I'm Joe Ramsey. Thousands of Ukrainians sought to escape the hellish siege of Mariupol on Tuesday as Russia pounded the city with bombs, and UN Chief Antonio Guterres appealed for Moscow to end its unwinnable war.
This war is unwinnable. Sooner or later, it will have to move from the battlefield to the peace table, and that is inevitable. The only question is, how many more lives must be lost?
The strategic port on the Azov Sea has suffered relentless shelling, but Ukrainian officials say it has not yet been captured as Russia's invasion, which began almost a month ago, is coming to what some officials call a stalemate. United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres also called for Russia to end its observed war.
Continuing the war in Ukraine is morally unacceptable, politically indefensible, and militarily nonsensical.
U.S. President Joe Biden plans to announce new sanctions against Russia on Thursday while in Brussels for meetings with NATO and European allies, according to a top national security aide. Biden, who will take part in a special meeting of NATO and address the European Council summit, is also expected to underscore efforts to enforce the avalanche of existing list of sanctions already announced by the U.S. and its allies.
He will join our partners in imposing further sanctions on Russia and tightening the existing sanctions to crack down on evasion and to ensure robust enforcement.
White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who declined to further preview the new sanctions the president will announce. Biden travels to Brussels and Poland. Poland has received more than 2 million Ukrainian refugees. This is VOA News. Russia blames the U.S. for a church split in Ukraine. AP correspondent Walter Ratliff reports.
Russia claims that foreign actors have encroached on its religious turf in Ukraine, even alleging the United States helped instigate an Eastern Orthodox schism there. Moscow Patriarch Kirill, head of the Russian Orthodox Church, said both the West and a rival patriarch were pursuing the same end of seeking to weaken Russia. Experts say the conflict in Ukraine isn't a religious war, but it has a religious dimension. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church was recognized as independent as recently as 2019. Many Ukrainian Orthodox remain loyal to the Moscow branch of the church, but that loyalty is now breaking down in response to the Russian invasion. I'm Walter Ratliff.
Meanwhile, in the U.S., as she faces senators' questions at her Supreme Court confirmation hearing, the first black woman to be nominated to the U.S. High Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson, is forcefully defending her record as a federal judge. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
Amid GOP concerns that her judicial philosophy is too liberal, Jackson laid out her process.
I ensure that I am proceeding from a position of neutrality.
And trying to understand what people who created the law intended. Jackson pushed back against Republican claims that she's soft on crime, rebutting suggestions she may have endangered kids by giving light sentences to child pornographers. As a judge and a mom,
nothing could be further from the truth.
Barring something unexpected, Democrats hope to have Jackson confirmed by Easter as the High Court's first black woman. Sagar Magani at the White House.
Rescuers in southern China searched for survivors from a China Eastern Airlines jet on Tuesday after it crashed with 132 people on board, and authorities said severe damage to the aircraft would make it difficult to establish the cause of the crash. The flight Monday plunged from cruising altitude to crash into the mountains less than an hour before landing time. A jet appeared to dive to the ground at an angle of about 35 degrees from the vertical in a video images from a vehicle's dashboard camera, according to Chinese media. No survivors have been found yet. Recapping our top story, thousands of Ukrainians are stuck in the city of Mariupol as Russia pounds the city with bombs, and UN Chief Antonio Guterres appealed for Moscow to win what he calls an unwinnable war. The strategic port has suffered relentless shelling, but Ukrainian officials say it has not been captured. There's an estimated that more than 200,000 people are trapped in the city, possibly without heat, power, or water, or food. Reporting by remote, I'm Joe Ramsey. This is VOA News. Reporting by remote, I'm Joe Ramsey. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Wednesday urged citizens around the world to take to the streets to protest Russia's invasion of his country.
Come from your offices, your homes, your schools and universities. Come in the name of peace. Come with Ukrainian symbols to support Ukraine, to support freedom, to support life. Come to your squares, your streets. Make yourselves visible and heard. Say that people matter, freedom matters, peace matters, Ukraine matters.
In a passionate speech on the one-month anniversary of Russia's invasion, Zelensky urged people around the world, quote, to stand against the war starting from March 24th and then, after then, to speak up against Russia's bloody war.
Russia started the war against freedom as it is. This is only the beginning for Russia on the Ukrainian land. Russia is trying to defeat the freedom of all people in Europe, of all the people in the world. It tries to show that only crude and cruel force matters.
The UN Security Council defeated a humanitarian resolution on Ukraine.
A Russian resolution on the growing humanitarian crisis in Ukraine that did not mention the Russian invasion that caused the situation was defeated in the United Nations Security Council. The resolution needed a minimum of 9 yes votes to pass in the 15-member council, but China was the only member to support Russia, with the 13 other council members abstaining. The defeat of the Russian resolution came as the General Assembly began consideration of a resolution drafted by Ukraine and 24 other countries and co-sponsored by nearly 100 nations. That resolution clearly states Russia's aggression is responsible for the growing humanitarian emergency. I'm Mike Rossiya.
This is VOA News. NATO estimates up to 15,000 troops have been killed while fighting in Ukraine. AP correspondent Mike Hempen reports.
A senior NATO official speaking on condition of anonymity estimates between 7,000 and 15,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in 4 weeks of fighting. That estimate is based on information from Ukrainian officials, information Russia has released, whether intentional or not, and on intelligence from open sources. When Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, it appeared Russian forces would swiftly topple Ukraine's government, but instead Ukrainian troops have put up unexpected resistance. Now Russia is bogged down in a grinding military campaign with no end in sight. I'm Mike Hempen.
The first woman to serve as America's top diplomat has died of cancer at age 84. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
In 1996, Bill Clinton tabbed her as the nation's first female Secretary of State.
I'm proud of that, but it had nothing to do with her getting the job.
Albright spent 4 years on the job and spent later years outspoken, criticizing the Bush administration's Iraq invasion.
There is now a chaotic situation.
And chairing a group tasked with reforming NATO.
In order to deal with the unpredictability in the 21st century.
In 1997, Albright had hailed cooperation between Washington and Moscow.
Russia is not our enemy. Russia is our friend.
Her death, nearly 25 years to the day, comes as President Biden heads for Europe to further confront Vladimir Putin over Russia's Ukraine invasion. Sagar Magani, Washington.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Wednesday the United States has officially assessed members of Russia's forces have committed war crimes in Ukraine, adding Washington's conclusion was based on a careful review of available information from public and intelligence sources. In a statement, Blinken said the United States will continue to track reports of war crimes and will share information it gathers with allies, international institutions, and added that a court of law would be ultimately responsible in determining any alleged crime. Recapping our top story, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky released a message early on Wednesday urging citizens around the world to take to the streets to protest Russia's invasion of his country. A passionate speech on the one-month anniversary of Russia's invasion, Zelensky urging the people around the globe to, quote, stand up against the war starting from March 24th and after then. Reporting by remote, I'm Joe Ray.
This is VOA News. Via remote, I'm Marissa Melton. U.S. President Joe Biden is offering more assurances to Ukraine and a warning to Russia. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Meghani has more.
In meetings at NATO's Brussels headquarters, the president and allies worked on the next steps in countering what is now Russia's month-long invasion of Ukraine and what would happen if Vladimir Putin deploys chemical weapons.
It would trigger a response in kind.
It's unclear if he intended to suggest U.S. or allied troops would go into Ukraine, something the president had earlier ruled out.
You're asking whether NATO would cross. We'd make that decision at the time.
He's also announced new sanctions on Russians and more humanitarian aid to Ukraine, whose president pleaded with allied leaders for more military assistance, saying just 1% of all their planes and tanks would give Ukraine 100% security. Sagar Meghani, Washington.
The White House announced Thursday plans for the United States to welcome as many as 100,000 Ukrainians and others fleeing the Russian invasion of the Eastern European nation. In a statement on its website, the White House said the plan is part of a larger $1 billion humanitarian aid package to assist all those affected by Russia's war in Ukraine. The White House said while it expects most Ukrainians will choose to remain in Europe, close to family and their homes, the refugees will be welcomed through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and the other usual legal pathways. The statement says it is also looking to expand and develop new programs focusing on Ukrainians who have family members in the United States. Refugee advocates welcomed the announcements but questioned the administration's ability to move refugee processing faster. This is VOA News. The U.S. House of Representatives' January 6th committee has set a contempt vote for two former Trump aides. AP correspondent Mike Gracia has that story.
The House committee investigating the riot at the U.S. Capitol has set a vote for Monday on whether to recommend referring contempt of Congress charges against Trump aides Peter Navarro and Dan Scavino. Navarro, who was trade advisor to former President Donald Trump, was subpoenaed by the committee in early February. He sought to use executive privilege to avoid cooperation, but the Biden administration denied executive privilege claims by Navarro and former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Scavino was subpoenaed last September. The committee believes Scavino was with Trump on January 6th and may have materials relevant to his videotaping and tweeting messages that day. Mike Gracia, Washington.
North Korea launched what appears to be an intercontinental ballistic missile on Thursday, the Japanese and South Korean governments said, in what would be Pyongyang's first long-range launch since 2017. Japan's Ministry of Defense says the North Korean missile flew for more than 70 minutes before landing in Japan's exclusive economic zone, just 170 kilometers west of northern Japan's Aomori prefecture. The missile reached an altitude of 6,000 kilometers and had a range of 1,100 kilometers. This, according to Japanese officials. They said the weapon appears to be a new type of ICBM. During an emergency meeting of South Korea's National Security Council, South Korean President Moon Jae-in strongly condemned the launch, saying it violated North Korea's self-imposed moratorium on long-range launches. The U.S. State Department has approved the potential sale to Bahrain of M270 multiple launch rocket systems upgrade and related equipment for an estimated cost of $176 million. This, according to the Pentagon Thursday. The principal contractor will be the Lockheed Martin Corporation. That's according to the Pentagon's Defense Security Cooperation Agency. And EU countries and EU lawmakers on Thursday reached a deal on landmark rules to curb the power of Alphabet's Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Microsoft. France, which currently holds the rotating EU presidency, said in a tweet that there was agreement. EU industry chief Thierry Breton also confirmed in a tweet. Apple's iCloud and iMessage services faced outages again on Thursday. It was the third time in a week. And circling back to our top story, President Biden is offering more assurances to Ukraine and a warning to Russia. And the White House has announced plans for the United States to welcome as many as 100,000 Ukrainians fleeing the Russian invasion. Marissa Melton, VOA News. This is VOA News. Via remote, I'm Marissa Melton. U.S. President Joe Biden praised Poland's response to the refugee crisis sparked by Russia's invasion of Ukraine during a visit to Poland on Friday. As the United States said, Russia appears to have shifted its military offensive away from Ukraine's capital of Kyiv and toward the country's east. Biden met Friday with Polish humanitarian workers and American troops near the border with Ukraine. In contrast, U.S. and Western officials said Friday that despite their superior numbers, Russian forces continue to struggle in Ukraine, prompting a change in strategy. Russia's deputy chief of the general staff all but confirmed the change in focus, saying that the first stage of Russia's operation, focused on reducing Ukraine's fighting capacity, quote, has generally been accomplished. Activists demanding action against climate change are taking up the call for an end to the war in Ukraine. AP correspondent Jennifer King has more.
In Berlin, Germany, thousands of mostly young people marched to the Brandenburg Gate in one of a series of climate rallies held around the world on Friday, demanding that leaders take stronger action against global warming. Many carried Ukraine's yellow and blue flag to show support for that embattled country. Their message is that peace and climate justice go together. Ilyas Elkortby with Fridays for Future Ukraine fled his hometown ahead of the Russian advance. He says Europe should stop buying tens of millions of euros in Russian fossil fuels each day.
The war in Ukraine could stop anytime. The EU, and especially Germany, just need to stop financing this.
Other activists demanded that countries invest as quickly as possible in renewable resources as an alternative to oil and gas from anywhere, not just Russia. I'm Jennifer King.
You can keep up on all the stories about Ukraine at our website, voanews.com. This is VOA News. Leaders of the U.S. House of Representatives are calling on Nebraska's Jeff Fortenberry to resign. AP correspondent Mike Gracia has that story.
House leaders from both parties are calling on Republican U.S. Representative Jeff Fortenberry of Nebraska to resign after being convicted of lying to federal authorities about an illegal $30,000 campaign donation. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy are both urging Fortenberry, a 9-term congressman, to leave office. Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts said he hopes Fortenberry will do the right thing and resign. After about 2 hours of deliberation Thursday, a federal jury in Los Angeles found Fortenberry guilty of concealing information and 2 counts of making false statements to authorities. Fortenberry will be sentenced June 28th, with each count carrying a potential 5-year prison sentence and fines. Mike Gracia, Washington.
A Yemeni rebel attack on a Saudi oil plant set off a huge fire near Jeddah's Formula One circuit during televised practice sessions on Friday. It was part of a wave of assaults on Aramco facilities. The Saudi-led coalition fighting the Iran-backed rebels confirmed the Jeddah attack. It was one of 16 drone and missile attacks by the Iran-backed rebels across the kingdom. The wave of assaults comes ahead of the 7th anniversary of a Saudi-led coalition's military intervention against the rebels in Yemen, a country in the grips of a major humanitarian crisis. Oil prices have soared since Russia's invasion of Ukraine sparked supply fears, prompting Western powers to implore Saudi Arabia and other members of the OPEC cartel to ramp up production. The rebels have frequently launched similar attacks on Saudi oil facilities, but the Jeddah attack came as a worldwide audience tuned in for the F1 Grand Prix. A spokesman for the F1 gave assurances that the event would continue as the delayed second practice session got underway. The U.S. government on Friday announced sanctions on 5 people and 5 entities connected to Myanmar's military. Those sanctioned include a military unit, arms dealers, military leaders, and companies and individuals working in the defense sector. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made the announcement in a statement on Friday. He said since the February 2021 military coup, the regime has only intensified its violent crackdown. And recapping our top story this hour, U.S. President Joe Biden is praising Poland's response to the refugee crisis that was sparked by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He visited Poland Friday as the United States said Russia appears to have shifted its military offensive away from the capital, Kyiv, and toward the country's east. Via remote, I'm Marissa Melton, VOA News.